Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's widespread but misunderstood, and advocates say the diagnosis can be life-changing.
It triggered enormous grief. I felt a deep sadness.
To those who don't have it, ADHD can sound like little more than distraction. In reality, it's a serious condition that impacts concentration, memory and behaviour in a way that, for many, can be debilitating.
Too often people with ADHD are accused of being lazy, not working hard enough, when often the real reason that they're struggling is they need more support and better structures through our education systems all the way through to our workplaces.
As more people openly talk about it, awareness has soared, with a growing number of women being diagnosed later in life. ADHD prescriptions have more than doubled over the past decade, with 1.5 million Aussies receiving medication for the condition in 1 year alone. It's estimated 5% of children and 2.5% of adults have it, but that many go undiagnosed. Because ADHD diagnoses primarily occur in the private system, the cost can be prohibitive, and it can take months to get an appointment. On Monday, the NDIS minister hinted that change could be coming.
I've asked the agency to give me more advice about diagnosis with ADHD in terms of eligibility for NDIS.
But soon after, a spokesperson clarified.
There are around 3,000 people with ADHD currently receiving the NDIS support, or 0.5% of the scheme. But there are no plans to widen the existing gateway to the scheme.
In the meantime, hundreds of thousands of Aussies struggle to get the immediate help they need.
There are too few professionals trained up to provide that support. So it's really important that the government steps up and provides funding to enable people to get an appropriate diagnosis.
Well, Ellie Demichelia is a disability advocate who was diagnosed with ADHD at 28, and she joins us now. Good to see you, Ellie. I know you haven't talked publicly about this diagnosis. What did it mean for you?
Oh, look, it changed the entire way I looked at the world, but mostly it changed the entire way I looked at myself. For 28 years, I had thought that I had all of these character flaws that I was criticising myself for, and the world was criticising me for, and I was trying to train myself out of. And then suddenly there was an answer to why these were happening that weren't in my control, and there was some support that could actually help me with these things. But there was also some grief that it took 28 years to get that answer, because for 28 years I really struggled, and it was actually little Ellie, little Ellie in primary school or going off to high school that struggled the most, and I had to grieve for her too.
I imagine that many of us have a particular image in our head when we think of ADHD, probably a young boy. What is it for you?
Look, what I realised is instead of that image of that little boy climbing the walls, for women what it is all the climbing the walls is done inside my brain. My brain never stops. My brain is running constantly with 7 different lanes of traffic, and sometimes they merge all at once. And so executive functioning, making decisions can be really hard at certain times of the day. There's lots of things that people have no idea about in terms of women and ADHD, and I think that's because you've got to understand the first piece of scientific research on ADHD that included women and girls was done in 1997 and released in 2003. I was already most of the way through primary school. That is why we are so far behind in getting women and girls diagnosed with ADHD.
For people who don't think that ADHD should be on the NDIS, what would you say to them, given how you just explained that it impacts your life?
Look, I think the question around should ADHD be on the NDIS or not is often posed to me by able-bodied people. People with disability are less, and neurodiverse people are less concerned about that. and more concerned about the fact that it takes 2 years in this country to see a psychiatrist who can diagnose you with ADHD. And when you see them, it can cost $6,000 to get an assessment and a diagnosis in this country. So way before we get to talking about the NDIS, we need to fix the problem of the lack of mental health professionals we have in this country, and the fact that you have to have, anywhere between $4,000 and $6,000 handy to get an assessment and diagnosis.
So, Ellie, do you think because of this, there'll be a lot of people living with ADHD that will never know?
I hope that there are people out there that, particularly parents, that go, that sounds like something my 10-year-old girl does, or that sounds like how she behaved. Maybe I'll just read a little bit more. Because I think what shocks people the most about my diagnosis is when I admit to them, sitting here in a wheelchair, I say to them, having ADHD is a lot harder than being born with cerebral palsy and being in a wheelchair. Having a neurodiverse brain is a lot harder than having a disabled body. And that's the honest truth. My brain stops me a lot more than my disabled body. And that's because this world is set up for neurotypical brains. And so we need to start thinking about how we support these kids, because they are magnificent, they are talented, they think of things in new ways, but they need support. So if parents out there could just do some research and think about it in that positive way of, if my kids get support, they're going to be all right.
Hey, Ellie, thank you so much for enlightening us all tonight. I think we all just learnt quite a lot.
Thank you so much for having me.